Okay, humans, give me your money. No, really, give me your money. I said, give me your fucking money. That's what it's all about, isn't it? The almighty dollar. Now we'll get back to that dollar. But let's talk about the lengths that people will go. You are a very incredible species with great potential, but that one fatal flaw, that drawback to humanity, the unquenchable lust for wealth and power. This is Stories from a Different Perspective by J.L. Sweeney, as told by Argus Truin. I am Argus Truin. The Assassination of Barrett Cartwright. He pulled the trigger. The hammer fell and he heard a loud pop. His head and body jerked to the left and he saw blood splatter the computer screen. It didn't feel like he had expected it would. There was no pain. Nothing at all. He couldn't feel anything. Then he began to feel as if he were floating. He could see the blood begin to run down the screen and thought that it was strange that he had killed himself but was still seeing things going on. Was the computer screen dimming? He thought so, but couldn't remember what he had been looking for. There was a final conscious thought right before his life essence drifted apart. Words echoing, an image of a beautiful blue-eyed woman. He knew her. Then there was nothing. Barrett Cartwright was found by his wife the next morning. His final novel sat behind the boxing poodle's screensaver on his computer. 11 months earlier. As soon as their eyes met, Barrett knew he was in trouble. Calypso's eyes had frozen him. They were the most beautiful, sparkling azure eyes he had ever seen. They were the color of the water you might see around the most spectacular of the southern Pacific Islands. They were so hypnotizing that he often had to remind himself to breathe when he was looking into them. Barrett believed that he had found his soulmate. They had left the party and gone for a long drive along the ocean. It was magical. After watching the sunrise together, he had dropped her off at her apartment. His fairy tale was about to come true. Calypso had insisted that they have a courtship, and Barrett was gentlemanly enough to agree. He didn't know it, and would never be able to understand that his plummet to hell had begun. Barrett Cartwright had been gifted with a vivid imagination. While other children were playing with dolls or action figures, Barrett was concocting wild tales. In the beginning, his mother had tried to deter his interest in the stories, but soon decided to encourage her son. Throughout elementary school, his stories were a joy for his teachers to read. In junior high, a caring teacher advised him to take some creative writing classes. He published his first book when he was 16. Money in youth usually equaled disaster, but Barrett had received a good upbringing from his mother. He spent his money wisely and had put some away for his future. By his high school graduation, he had written a second novel and had put together a collection of short stories. He hadn't really felt like going to college, but did so to please his mother. He received a B.A. in literature 3 years later, and at that time it seemed as if nothing could make his life any better. At 21 years old, he had more than enough money to last a lifetime. He lived the life that common men only dream about. Everyone loved Barrett because he treated everyone fairly. He was the type of person who would stop to chat with and eventually give a $20 bill to a homeless person. He had no enemies. His life was very good. The announcement was made, coincidentally, on his 23rd birthday that Gorzoff & Sons Publishing was going to award a $10 million contract to the author who could convince the board that his next novel would be a huge bestseller. A $1 million advance was to be awarded as an incentive. After 2 months, the field was narrowed down to Barrett and a writer named A.A. Martine. Each author was given the chance to promote his idea for a second time, and the board unanimously voted for Barrett. Of course, Martine was enraged by the outcome and stormed out of the boardroom. Barrett threw a huge party that night to celebrate with his friends and acquaintances. He was not a grudging person, and invited Martine to prove that there were no hard feelings about the harsh words that had been said at Gorzoff & Sons. Martine had accepted the invitation to show that he agreed. It was a party the likes of which most people can't even imagine. Well over 300 guests arrived, and more poured through the door every minute. Barrett had gone to the wine cabinet with the intent of sharing a bottle with Fuchsia Dramonova when Calypso appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, engaged in a conversation with Mary Duchesne. He was pulling a bottle of Merlot out of the rack when she looked over at him. That moment had been frozen in time for him. Every time he looked at her after that, it was as if he were looking at her for the first time. Her eyes had shined, and she had smiled when she caught him staring at her. Mary and her made their way into the hallway toward the restrooms and disappeared from sight. Barrett had to take several deep breaths to calm himself. She was the most beautiful, exotic, enchanting woman on the planet, and she had smiled at him. He stood there in awe, cradling the bottle of wine, all thought of sharing it with Fuchsia gone. He was tingling all over when she came back through the kitchen. This time she stopped in front of him. "Are you going to open that bottle and share it, or cuddle with it all night?" she had said, smiling and looking into his eyes. He had been captivated. When he didn't reply, she winked. "I was just joking. I'm Calypso," she said, extending her hand. Barrett kneeled and kissed it. "I'm not worthy to look upon your beauty," he told her, with his head bowed low. She raised his chin with her hand. "We'll see," she said. He didn't move. She winked and smiled again. "Arise, peasant, and fill my glass." Barrett had already gone over the novel in his mind. He had a catchy opening, a juicy body, and a realistic ending to the story. They were giving him a year to complete it, but he felt sure that it would only take him a month or two. He could relax for a week before beginning. He felt that it was always in the best interest of the novel to give his mind a good rest before he began to write. He put his heart and soul into his stories and was usually physically and emotionally drained after completing them. He would then take another week of rest before he began to edit and revise. He repeated this routine as many as 7 times before being satisfied that he could not make it any better. He would go to his cabin in the Blue Mountains for a week, maybe asking Calypso if she wanted to go with him. A beautiful woman and the crisp mountain air would put him in the perfect frame of mind for this upcoming novel. Barrett could smell coffee brewing. He was certain that everyone had gone home last night. He tiptoed quietly to the kitchen and was shocked to see Calypso cooking breakfast. She glanced over her shoulder at him, smiled, and beckoned him to come into the kitchen. He thought he had moved silently, but somehow she had heard him. He went to the table and sat. She served him. It was the best breakfast he had ever had in his life. She was perfect, beautiful, sexy, intelligent, outgoing, and a good cook. It was unbelievable. Through bites of his breakfast, he told her his plans for the coming week. "Please don't go to the mountains," she begged, showing him puppy dog eyes. "I have to start my book in a week, and it takes me a week to get relaxed enough to start," he told her. She moved behind him and began to massage his shoulders. "Can't you put it off for an extra week?" she questioned. "Yes, I can," he said, smiling, thinking to himself about the one that didn't get away. "I'll put it off for 2 weeks. I know it won't take me long to write this one. I almost have it memorized, beginning to end." Calypso took him to a party that lasted 2 days. Barrett had never been into drugs, but knew that he would make any exception for Calypso. He was fairly certain that he would do anything in the world for her short of murder, and even that might be possible given the right circumstances. A few days later, she took him to another raging party, and a few days later, yet another. Barrett began to enjoy these types of parties, and they went more often. His 2 weeks had slipped by, and he felt the nagging urge to get away to his cabin. After mentioning this to Calypso one morning, as they left a party, she begged him to take 1 more week. She told him that she had a special party lined up for him that he just couldn't miss. He agreed, and 3 days later she took him blindfolded to an apartment somewhere. It was a nice place, and the first thing she did was to cut out a few lines of cocaine. He was feeling a bit burned out, but did as she asked anyway. As he was finishing his second line, someone walked into the room. A blonde that he had recognized from several of the earlier parties walked over and sat down beside him and snorted a line of her own. Calypso smiled and told him that this was only the beginning. Another girl soon joined them, this one a brunette, and it wasn't long before the 3 women were naked and engaging in pleasing one another. Barrett could barely contain himself, and when he finally was asked to join, He believed that even heaven could not compete with being near Calypso. More weeks began to pass, and Barrett felt that he had to get to work, but was unable to stop enjoying the nasty things Calypso did for him, to him, and with him. They tried everything. One morning, after a sex feast, she woke him up, whispering in his ear, "Barrett, I want to take a break for a week. Let's go to Jamaica." He opened his eyes to find her smiling at him. He couldn't say no, and that afternoon they were on a plane to Jamaica. It was a glorious week, and again he felt that life could not get any better. While in Jamaica, Calypso made a comment about Fiji. They spent a week there. She mentioned Europe. They spent 2 weeks there. He bought her clothes. He bought her jewelry. They partied. She told him she worshipped his every breath. He worshipped her as a goddess. They were never away from each other for more than 5 minutes. 6 months into their relationship, he proposed. She accepted, and the wedding was a scene out of heaven. Angels were everywhere. Angels carved of ice, a choir of girls dressed as angels. All of the banquet servers were dressed as angels. Calypso had mentioned that she loved angels, and Barrett would not disappoint her. They spent 3 weeks in Greece on their honeymoon. "I have to write." He put the bottle of tequila down. He shook his head, and his body swayed back and forth. "I have to write. Too drunk. I'll start in the morning, no matter what. I'll start in the morning." He fell out of the chair and passed out. His deadline was approaching, and he was only 2/3 of the way through his story. He would have to stop going out for the next few weeks. Calypso knew that he had to finish this, but still kept him out partying 3 nights a week. Barrett was finally growing tired of the party life. It had been fun for the first few weeks, maybe even the first couple of months, but it was old now. He couldn't understand how she could do it constantly. He loved her with all of his heart, but enough was enough. He had to finish his book. Tonight was one of her party nights, but he was going to refuse tonight. She had told him that she had something special planned for tonight, but it really didn't matter to him. He wasn't going to be part of it. He rubbed his eyes hard and then leaned back and stretched. Noise from downstairs caught his attention, and he went to see what it was. Moans were coming from the kitchen. He peeked around the corner and his jaw dropped. Calypso was on top of their kitchen table writing Martine. "What the hell?" he screamed. "Oh, hi," Martine smiled. This just wasn't right. Barron couldn't believe what he was seeing. The love of his life was screwing his main competitor. Calypso climbed off Martine and smiled at Barrett. "Thanks for the ride, Barrett. It was fun. There's just something about Martine that turns me on more than you do. He fills an empty space inside me that you could never hope to reach." Barrett leaned against the wall. He had used up most of his savings traveling with her and buying things for her. He had changed his will for her. He had given her everything that she had wanted. Now, as he was trying to finish this novel to get the other $9 million of the contract, she was revealing to him that it was all an act. "This can't be happening. Things like this don't happen. I've done everything for you. This isn't real. This can't be real," Barrett repeated over and over. She walked over to him. He could smell how hot her body was. It had always drove him wild. This time it nearly made him gag. "I can't even begin to tell you how sick you make me, Barrett. I hated the way you were always so goody-goody and so nice to everyone." Her beautiful eyes flashed with hate. "You can't even imagine how much I hated fucking you. How much I hated telling you that I loved you, that you were the most perfect thing that had ever happened to me." Barrett's knees finally gave out. He fell to the floor and puked. "Poor baby. How do you like your dose of reality?" Calypso's words felt like hot knives stabbing him all over his body. Tears ran down his cheeks. He looked up at her. "Why?" he sobbed. There was no sign of pity in her eyes. She felt nothing. She towered above him, a beautiful, horrible ice queen. "Simple," she said. "The things I said to you, I actually feel for Martine. When you beat him out for the novel contract, I knew what I had to do. We had plans for that money, Barrett. I had plans for that money," she ranted at him. "Now you won't have time to finish your story, and then we'll give the contract to Martine. Then I will have my money. Besides, You could never have satisfied me the way Martine does. He loves me more than you ever did or could. You never proved how much you loved me. Sure, you took me places and bought me things, but I wanted your soul. You never proved to me how much you really loved me." She smiled an evil smile, walked back over to the table, and leaned over it, spreading her legs. "Do it to me now, Martine," she commanded. Without another look at Barrett, they began having sex again. Barrett crawled away from the kitchen, making his way back toward his den, trying without success to ignore Calypso's overly accentuated moans of pleasure. He poured another drink. The tequila burned its way down into his stomach. He took a deep breath and began. His fingers flew across the keys. He pulled the trigger. The hammer fell and he heard a loud pop. His head and body jerked to the left and he saw blood splatter the computer screen. It didn't feel like he had expected it would. There was no pain. Nothing at all. He couldn't feel anything. Then he began to feel as if he were floating. He could see the blood begin to run down the screen and thought that it was strange that he had killed himself but was still seeing things going on. Was the computer screen dimming? He thought so, but couldn't remember what he had been looking for. There was a final conscious thought right before his life essence drifted apart, words echoing an image of a beautiful, blue-eyed woman. He knew her. Then there was nothing. Barrett Cartwright died at age 24 of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. His final novel would net over $100 million. Calypso got everything. Barrett had changed his will, making her the sole beneficiary. She left Martine the day she acquired her inheritance. This was the story that Barrett wrote. Anything for a dollar, right, humans? Now back to that dollar. Well, you're not getting your dollars, humans. Your elected officials are. Every month they get paid, and you don't. Be safe, humans. Think straight. Be right. We're out. Fuckers. Don't put that fuckers part in there. We're out. Peace. Laters. Humans! Give me your fucking money!